All right. Hello, folks. Just so you know, this is Lark, and I have a little bit of a sniffle problem. I'm allergic to weather. That's really weird. Anyway, so this is Lark,
Kimberly, hello everybody.
and this is auto asphyxiation. Today we're going to be talking about building inclusive working class women solidarity because apparently voting does have to do with a lot of things that has to do with feminism and transportation. Like apparently the Trump administration is like, we're going to take away transportation from funding. We're going to take away transportation funding from people who aren't married and have low birth rates. What? Anyway.
Well, that will get them married and having babies much faster, obviously.
I think we should have a few weddings on the train. I think we should have like three lesbian weddings on the train and bus because he didn't, since he didn't. I don't know if he was specific. It's
Maybe we should stage a birth.
just some live births on the train. That's what we should do. Exactly. It's a wild world. I kind of wanted to bring up the Super Bowl happened, and there was a long time ago there was a study saying that domestic violence rates went up during the Super Bowl, but then they were like, oh no, we don't know if that's true or not. But then in 2011, in the Quarterly Journal of Economics, they found that an unexpected upset loss, for example, that when a home team is predicted to win by 4 or more, but it didn't, correlated with a 10% increase in the rate of domestic violence. So let's take some time to think about the women who were abused by their husbands yesterday because their little ball playing team did win.
That is not an insignificant number. Like 10% is pretty significant. Like
No, it is. And I don't think people I think this is gonna kind of I guess probably gonna shape a little bit of our conversation. Because I think, when we talk about, I think we really need to be talking about intersectionality in regards to solidarity, or just maybe that's not the right word, but a word that we should have like solidarity among the Democratic Party, kind of like fostering is kind of like how can we have a working class solidarity among women voters that kind of centers the unique struggles of women, whether they are Black, Latina, Asian, Indigenous, Arab, Jewish, and multiracial. Like, how it seems like we don't trust each other. And the thing is that maybe that's the media so much, like, and I hate kind of like the evil media, but kind of like this mainstream media where it's kind of like we have this view of like, okay, these are the good women and these are the bad women, or and this is not like to just not, like I said, this is not to kind of dismiss people who are actually doing harmful things, but not everyone is being harmful. Like, I don't know, like you said, like a lot of times our organizing kind of defaults to these kind of like cultural like silos, and you know, and even within labor, we kind of forget the non-male perspectives. We forget the non-white perspectives. We forget like in the labor movement and things like that.
Well, when we were talking about this and you sent me over like the notes, I was thinking about like how can we really reach out to the people that had either abstained from voting or voted third party during this election season. And I think that a big thing, and I am guilty of this as the next person, but we have a tendency to definitely vote shame people.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm guilty of it. I've been as guilty in the past, and it's not something that fosters solidarity.
Yeah.
And I'm a big enough person to admit that I'm wrong when I do that, and that I'm not fostering solidarity with perhaps somebody that, look, we all have more in common than we have separating us. I tell that to my stepson all the time. When you're trying to negotiate with somebody, when you're trying to have a conversation with somebody, what common ground can you find?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, and I think about it this way. It's like, okay, in regards to the campaign, women predominantly, most women in plurality vote for vote for the candidate that's more progressive, that is, we'll say, that's Democratic. I mean, but the thing is that in this kind of paradigm, white women have often voted differently. The only time they didn't vote Democratic was with Kennedy in 64, and Clinton in 96. But I think it's worth noting that with Harris, more white women did vote for her than they voted for Hillary or Biden, and 57% of college-educated white women did vote for, 57% of educated white women voted for Harris. And if you actually, because it's so weird how they decide who they're going to separate out. Jewish women voted 80% for Harris, and Jewish men 71%. And I think there's an interesting conversation in that conversation, but we'll talk about that on another time. Because I was kind of like, well, seemed like that was a solid vote, a vote you didn't have to really change much in order to make happen. I don't see how they would have just flipped over owing to a certain issue. We will get into that later. But I mean, what are your thoughts or your ideas or?
Well, I definitely think that we need to, like I said before, we need to really focus on what we have in common. We can't really afford purity tests at this point in time.
Yeah.
We can't even afford purity tests amongst our own leftist friends and compatriots and things like that, because this is like go time. Like, I feel like, this is go time. Like, I don't know what you're waiting for. Like, why are we still talking about the little nitty gritty stuff? We need to really talk about how we're going to build momentum so that we can survive. So, when we're talking to like people, we also have to look at the fact that, yes, I'm very ready for all of my leftist friends to call me a filthy liberal for saying these things. But we really do need to look at the fact that that Biden's administration was not a lame duck administration.
Yeah.
He did have some very good victories. He had excellent economic victories. He helped to expand Medicare. He cut down prescription costs. And those are all things that a Harris economy would have inherited.
Yes. And for me, when looking at the transportation angle of it, like just funding trains, funding buses, who takes trains and buses? We do. Yeah. I mean, and I'm just, in my own head, like now I'm like, oh, we're only going to fund transportation and like high birth rates, high, marriage rates. Like Utah's about to be lit. I mean, not trying to mock that.
Yeah.
if he's not lying, which he does a lot. But another thing I wanted, we've talked about this. I remember like one time during the Harris election, like it was like these people who were part of Harris campaign, they were like, yeah, we went to the middle country, and these women were like scared, and they were like, they were going to vote behind their husband's back, and they were kind of like laughing, and I'm just kind of like, we were both like, ooh,
that's real.
That's real. Like, he really will beat her up. It's not like, and the thing is that, why would you, before the campaign ended, why would you say that?
Yeah. Like, it's not funny.
It's not funny, but also, if she was going to vote, now he knows. You just like told her.
Now he knows. And while I think it is really important to send a message to women who are in those kind of situations where they feel they can't vote their own conscience or their own voice, I thought it was the messaging of nobody knows who you vote for, that the Democratic Party was good messaging, and like they had billboards in like rural areas in the Midwest and the South. However, I can't help but also to think about the woman or two or who knows how many that drove past one of those billboards with her husband and got a crack in the face just for looking at it. So we need to get this message out to women, but how can we do it in a way that doesn't put them in danger as well?
Yeah, and I don't think a lot of people really grasp exactly kind of what happens. Like when I moved from LA, and here's the thing, We're in New Jersey. This is not the middle of the country, but yet it has very middle in the country ways. And I don't think I've ever experienced the kind of sexism and intimidation that I have had in suburban New Jersey in California. I remember that when I moved here, and I already talked about this story before. I talk about this creative caravan woman, and she was talking about the sexism of this ice cream store across the street. And I remember men coming to our talk, and they were coming in this really intimidating way. It was really kind of scary. And I don't think that people who are on, who are of a certain socioeconomic class from a certain region understand the power that men have over women in the middle of the country. I don't think they quite understand the level of intimidation, the level. And then this is not like, poor white women. That's not what I'm trying to say, because we know that this kind of like trauma happens to Black women, it happens to Indigenous women, it happens to Latinas. But the thing is that because white women are such a large voting bloc, and I'm not saying, this is the only reason it matters because of the voting thing. It's not, but I'm saying this is an issue that we don't view as a issue that's a valid reason or thing that happens. And I think it happens way more than we think it happens.
I absolutely think that it does. And also when you think about, things like, you mentioned Utah, the FLDS and similar kind of fundamentalist churches or organizations, like those women, regardless of what they might want to do, or even if they're not in an abusive relationship, like physically or anything like that, they are raised and truly and honestly believe that what their husband says goes, and they have to vote that way, whatever their husband says.
I think that's just
so those are the people that, we're not really like looking at or thinking about or talking about either.
Yeah. And I mean, and also too, it's just like, and then on the other hand, we have these people who kind of like, and I don't think we can even flip these people, but they're very interesting. And we have these right-wing co-ops. That's like, think about like a lot of women are kind of drawn to like the QAnon, lavender QAnon, and the trad wife, the traditional wife, and all these kinds of things. And it's like, I think these people are gone, but how can we do like a kind of a vibe, like where we're kind of, and would that be ethical for us to kind of like, well, what are they doing that we are not doing in order to make them feel like, okay, I can break free? I'm wondering, is it manipulation? Is it like how we're telling the story? Like, how can we go, the people who might be able to kind of like really be enthusiastic supporters, what can we do? Like, what can we do in order, like a pragmatic kind of like working class, like how can we make working class solidarity look sexy? And I don't know, that's just horrible.
It's, I thought about this a lot because I think that like the whole trad wife thing, I honestly believe that it's right-wing propaganda. I think it has a clear message. I think it's been organized very effectively by the people that they've chosen to put out as like influencers. They're very skinny, pretty, organized looking women. So I have a hard time. It's not even so much, yes, I think that we need to be more accepting of people that have deep faith, because we tend to not really be, or tend to not really make them feel like they're accepted. But at the same time, I do kind of shy away from that messaging that like the trad wife videos and influencers kind of get to, because I do think that it's very manipulative.
You're right. I do. You're right. This is like, how do these people have all this money to do all this stuff? This has got to be funded by these. And I think that's another thing too, we don't really take into consideration. The right spends a lot of money on media. way more money than the left, with, as we
So
know,
much money.
I mean, thousands and thousands of dollars to kind of like shape these ideas and shape this kind of, and it's like, to try to get the left and to try to get progressives to put the same kind of money in, as we are also raising money for our podcast, it's I think we kind of go, oh, how can we do that? We can't do that without millions of dollars. They have, thousands and thousands of,
they have billions and billions of dollars. Most of those influencers that we think of when we think of trad wife, their husbands are billionaires. Like, though, there was one that they did a write-up of in Vogue, like her husband is the son of the founder of JetBlue Airlines. Like, so they have the money to send this message out. They have the money to really own the narrative. And I do really think that they own the narrative in a lot of important areas in the country during this last election. I think that, and there's people and they've convinced a lot of the women that live in these small rural communities around the country that, the places like where we live, you and I, are like war zones. Like, and that we can't even like walk down the street or take our dog for a walk. Like there's significant like satanic panic type messaging that really keeps a lot of, and it is coming from men, that really keeps a lot of these women feeling vulnerable, feeling scared, and therefore trapped purposefully because of their message.
No, it is really true. I mean, and I think that, a lot of these, we're thinking like, oh, this is just organic. And well, not weird, just me. We're like, it's an organic message. And it's like, this is not organic. This is actually a manufactured message. And we're thinking this is like, and so we're trying to compete against this machine. It's a machine. And we're actually people. And we can't, people and a machine, we're going to be doing different things. We're going to be, moving in a different way. And I think this is, and this is something I think we have to really, really think about. Like, okay, we are literally, and I what I think about? I think about the fact that in regard to the anti-vax movement, and the Black community, I remember that there was a period where essentially the Black community had, in at least in Los Angeles, there were certain parts of Black LA that were more working class, and they had a lot fewer. They had a lot less media. A lot less media. A lot of our Black media was in Leimert Park or the Crenshaw area, which is the west side of Black Los Angeles. But the east side of Black Los Angeles did not have as much media. And essentially, people with a whole bunch of money came in, and essentially they were like saying that vaccines are not good for you, et cetera, et cetera. And I think in the same way, that exact same thing happened to the middle of the country in regards to like, there's no media, but then you have this really fancy, sophisticated media, and you think, well, this person must be legit because it's like this vacuum of, and I think this is, kind of points to why media is so important, because when you have that vacuum, you're essentially kind of inviting people who are going to do unsavory things that can kind of just go in there, and there's nobody challenging them. No one's saying, hey, what you're saying doesn't make any sense, or this is not okay, because there's absolutely no one in the space.
Yes, you're exactly right. You're exactly right. There is a vacuum. There's an information vacuum. And a lot of times our messaging, the messaging of the Democratic Party or the messaging of leftists, is inaccessible to a lot of working class women that live in these areas that have received a different message.
I mean, and this is like, this is even across cultural, groups. There was kind of like that Trump made some inroads in some other, and I think I feel like we still never really talk about white men in regards to that. We're kind of like everyone. We're talking about everyone, but I mean, I guess in a way we're not doing that because we feel like, hey, I mean, can we pull them over? And I think about we kind of cater a lot to a certain demographic of white men. I think about the class versus identity. We, especially on the left, we talk a lot about like, working class solidarity, et cetera, et cetera. but it's often coded as like white, male, rural. It doesn't talk about, care workers, domestic workers, women of color, like who are working in like, the gig economy doing Uber driving. It doesn't talk about stay-at-home parents or like scholars or service workers or people who work at McDonald's. Like, how are we going to talk about, class solidarity when we're using class as a code for white men?
We need a phrase. We need something to call each other that really like solidifies what we are to everybody. Like I noticed, like I was telling you about I'm on XHS, the little red book Chinese app, and the level of respect that people have for one another on that app is just, it's like a breath of fresh air in regards to how people speak to each other on social media, on Western apps. Even when people disagree, it's always like, my brother, I don't think that you're hearing me correctly, or sister, I see that you've done this, and I had a different suggestion. And it's really that like, and yeah, in certain leftist spaces, we might call each other like comrade or things like that. But I think that that has such a connotation. The propaganda that the West has done against communism has been very effective, so that when they see a bunch of us walking around and calling each other comrade, it comes off as snarky and as they're not part of the group. So I think if, like that kind of like feeling of belonging goes a long way with people.
I like to
and when else I like the term folks also. Folks is a great one too. And that's, that covers everybody.
Yeah, it does. It covers everyone, and it seems like it's like a kind of like, working folks, like, oh, I'm just folk. I mean, that's just like, I mean, and I think the thing about the sister and the brother and the folks thing, it seems like familiar, and it seems like I like you, like we're friends. I think sometimes with comrade, it doesn't sound like you're my friend. It's kind of like, I'll work with you. And I remember somebody even said this: comrade doesn't mean I like you, just means I need to work with you. I'm like, well, damn.
Yeah. And I think, and also like, like Evan, my husband, has said to me, there is a certain connotation to the word brother amongst like working class white men. Like he does not like it when he sees like if he's like out and about and a white man walks up to him and is like, hello, brother. There's like a Hulk Hogan-y kind of, Aryan Nation connotation to that, like, and I understand that why that exists as well. But I do think that we need something that unites all of us together. When I was talking about accessibility earlier too, a lot of our messaging is just the messaging in and of itself is not accessible. It uses a lot of big terminology, and I don't want to say like big words or anything like that. People aren't stupid, but for example, like myself, like I have ADHD and I have a really hard time sitting down and reading anything that's nonfiction. My brain just doesn't like it. So when I try to read things like theory, it feels inaccessible to me because of the language that it's written in. It's very dry. Even reading it as an audiobook is very dry, and like my brain just doesn't want to hold on to the information. So that's what like I'm talking about, like with it in terms of accessibility. Like we have to like have a message that people can really like, oh, okay, like that makes sense. I understand, like we have to find that common ground.
Yeah, exactly. And even like people who are like, we talk about like the people who stayed home. Like, how can we go like, hey, you know what? You're one of us. We care about you. And in order for us to continue to care about you and do things for you, we need you to go out and vote. And I know people have told you voting doesn't matter, but I'll tell you something. If voting didn't matter, they wouldn't be paying so much money to make you not vote.
To make you not vote. Exactly.
I mean, it's really, and I think it's kind of, interesting. People will always take that Lucy Parsons thing quote. She says, if voting made a difference, rich people wouldn't allow you to do it. And I'm like, in regards to Black people, they haven't allowed us to do it. That's what you're acting as if we are voting, and as if they haven't been actually dismantling our voting rights here. It's like, yes, that's, they aren't allowing us to do it. So her quote is correct, but you're actually interpreting it really wrong, because they literally are preventing people from voting. In other words, I was talking about John Pabst, and he was saying like how many people got denied, essentially after they dismantled the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act. Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, they peeled a whole bunch of people rolls, which shows you how powerful those votes were, that they went so far to literally not allow people to vote.
Ballot boxes that had explosives or got caught on or got set on fire, if your voice didn't matter, why would people be trying so hard to shut you up?
Exactly.